And finally tonight, the unfolding drama of a political figure at a key turning point in American history. Gwen Ifill has our conversation.
Historian Robert Caro has spent nearly 4 decades telling the story of a single man, former President Lyndon Baines Johnson. The fourth hefty volume in his series of biographies is The Passage of Power. It covers the pivotal 4 years between 1960 and 1964, as Johnson rose from senator to vice president and then, through the stunning tragedy of the Kennedy assassination, to president. And there is yet a 5th volume to come. Robert Caro joins me now. Thank you.
Nice to be here.
It seems like this is a book about transformation.
Yes, a transformation. Lyndon Johnson, at the beginning of it, is the mighty Senate Majority Leader, the most powerful Majority Leader in history. He descends to the pit of the vice presidency in 3 years of humiliation, and then in a single crack of a gunshot, it's all reversed, and he's president of the United States.
You use that term, crack of a gunshot, throughout the book. It seems that is the running theme.
Well, you know, and the people who are in, when you ask John Connolly, for example, he says everyone else thought it was a motorcycle backfire or a firecracker, but I was a hunter all my life. I knew it was the crack of a hunting rifle. So does the Secret Service agent in Johnson's car. At the moment the gunshot sounds, he sees President Kennedy 2 cars above start to fall to the left. He whirls around, he grabs Lyndon Johnson's shoulder, throws him down to the floor of the car, leaps over the back seat, and lays on top of him. Johnson was later to say, "I'll never forget his knees in my back and his elbows in my back," and shields Johnson's body with his own as they're racing to Parkland Hospital.
This moment, this transformative moment in our history, happened just at the time when Lyndon Johnson was at his most miserable in his entire public career as vice president.
He was telling his aides to find other jobs. He said, "I'm finished. Go with somebody else."
And it's possible that Kennedy thought he was finished too.
Well, it certainly was starting to look like that might be more of a possibility.
Let's talk a little bit about his relationship with the Kennedys. Gary Wills wrote one of the reviews of this book, and he described the book as a moral disquisition on the nature of hatred.
Well, you know, there are 3 strong personalities: Lyndon Johnson, Jack Kennedy, and Bobby Kennedy. Lyndon Johnson despises Jack Kennedy. When he's the Senate Majority Leader, Kennedy is a young senator. Johnson said of him, he's pathetic. He was pathetic as a senator. He didn't even know how to address the chair. He used to mock him. He used to literally call him not a man's man. He said he used to say to people, you know how skinny his ankles are? And he'd hold up his things like this. He doesn't realize. He thinks he's going to have the Democratic nomination in 1960. He doesn't realize that this young senator, for whom he has no respect, really is a great politician and is racing around the country, corralling delegates, impressing people, and taking the nomination away from him. By the time Johnson wakes up, it's really too late.
And that his little brother, who eventually was considered the real number 2 when President Kennedy was president, even though he was an attorney general, that he would be undercutting him at every turn. At least that's the way Johnson saw it.
Bobby Kennedy, you know, you hate to use words as a historian like hatred. But hatred isn't too strong a word to describe the relationship between Robert Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. They hated each other. Robert Kennedy said of Lyndon Johnson after his brother was killed, he said he never would call Johnson president. So when he uses the word president, it's his brother. He said, "My president was a gentleman and a human being. This man is not. He's mean, bitter, vicious, and animal in many ways."
Animal. There were 2 episodes right around the assassination between them. One when Lyndon Johnson called Robert Kennedy to ask if it was okay to get sworn in Dallas, and the other when Bobby Kennedy arrived at Air Force One when the plane landed in Washington.
That telephone call, you know, is one of the things that when you learn about it, you're really sad. I mean, it's a moment you can hardly understand. Robert Kennedy is sitting by the swimming pool at Hickory Hill, his place in Virginia. Suddenly he sees a workman who's painting the house clap a transistor radio to his ear and come running down toward the pool. At the same moment, the telephone rings on the table by him, and Ethel, his wife, picks it up. And it's J. Edgar Hoover to tell Robert Kennedy that his brother has been shot. Less than an hour later, the man that Robert Kennedy hated is on the phone to him asking the formalities of how he assumes his brother's power. The secretary who took down the oath, Johnson asked Robert Kennedy to put the wording of the oath. You know, Kennedy, he could have asked any one of 100 people for that. And the secretary, Kennedy has Nicholas Katzenbach, his deputy, give him the oath. And I asked the secretary, a woman named Marie Famer, who still lives in Washington, you know, what it was like. And she says, Katzenbach's voice was like steel. Bobby was not. He had started. I thought, you shouldn't be doing this.
Jackie Kennedy was also, we see her in that photograph in which she gave great legitimacy to the passing of power by standing next to Lyndon Johnson when he took that oath. But she had mixed feelings as well about Johnson.
Well, you know, she once wrote to Ted Sorensen after, you must know how frightened my husband was that Lyndon Johnson might become president. This was really after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the Johnson was so hawkish in the meetings of the ExCom.
He was hawkish, and he was pretty much pushed to the side as well.
Yes.
During that period.
Yes.
But so let's keep back on this transformation theme. So he becomes president through no actions of his own. There is this boiling resentment. There is this grief which overcomes all of the members of the Kennedy inner circle. And yet here comes the Texan to take over. And in his first speech to a joint session of Congress, what does he do? He decides to take on civil rights.
Yes, he says the most important thing we can do is pass the Civil Rights Bill that Jack Kennedy introduced and fought for so long. And he picks up this bill. You know, at the time that Kennedy was assassinated, at the moment he was assassinated, his two top priority bills, civil rights and tax cuts, are really dead in the water in Congress. Congress has stopped him. The Southerners control, I think it's 9 of the 16 great standing committees of the Senate. They control the Senate absolutely. The Civil Rights Bill hasn't even gotten over to the Senate. It's in the House Rules Committee, which is ruled over by Judge Howard W. Smith of Virginia. And he's refusing even to tell anybody when he'll get to have hearings on the Civil Rights Bill. Johnson, you know, Johnson was a genius. He was a legislative genius. He remembers that a Representative Richard Bowling of Missouri has introduced a discharge petition to take the bill away from Smith's committee. Now, these petitions seldom go anywhere, and a president is never behind them because it's challenging all the House prerogative. Johnson makes a call to Bowling, and you have to say the first half of the call is Johnson saying, I'll never interfere with the House prerogatives. Then he says to Bowling, do you see any other way to get this out of committee? Bowling says no. And I wrote in the book, if there was only one lever, Lyndon Johnson was going to push it. And to watch him push that discharge petition through and get the Civil Rights Bill is legislative genius.
It's the old Lyndon Johnson that we know from Master of the Senate, your last book. And,
yes.
and it's him come back. But in it, he also says, you quote him as saying to Doris Kearns Goodwin, the historian, I had to take the dead man's program and turn it into the martyr's cause.
Yes. And he uses the sympathy that people had for Kennedy. That helped him get the bills moving. But he also uses his great knowledge of legislative techniques and the secrets of the Senate to get these bills moving.
And in the next book, we will hear about what brought him down, and that's the war in Vietnam.
Very dark story.
Very dark
Sad story.
But we look forward to reading it, Robert Caro. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gwen.
You can find more of Gwen's interview with Robert Caro, plus photos from his book, on our website.